Hello, everyone. I want to talk about yesterday's Bernie Sanders endorsement of Hillary Clinton at the Democratic National Convention. It was a pretty strong endorsement, unambiguous, unequivocal, and many of Bernie Sanders' supporters were very dismayed by it. So I want to talk about my position on this because I was and still am a strong supporter of his. So I want to try to explain why he did that and how Bernie Sanders supporters should react. So the first thing I want to say is that his endorsement of Clinton is the first thing I want to say is that it's not binding. Okay, so just because I supported him doesn't mean that me and many other people supported him doesn't mean that we have to follow through on everything that he says politically for the rest of our lives or the rest of his life. It doesn't mean that we agree with every single plank in his platform, even. And in fact, I disagreed with him on at least two or three things. And I still was a very strong, avid supporter of his. Okay, I disagreed. I disagree, for example, with the um, denouncing welfare reform in the mid 1990s. I think it was a good thing. I agree with. This is one of those areas where I agree with the Clinton administration for having done that. Okay, on TPP, I was originally for it, and I flipped. Um, I actually changed my mind. This is one of the few things in the last year or two on which I changed my mind. Okay, so I'm just trying to show you that I'm not supporting him because I agree with everything that he says. So I am critical and I am able to make up my own mind. And yet I thought that he was obviously the closest one, the one who approximates my interests and my positions most closely. And so that's why I supported it. So yeah. So that's one thing that I wanted to get out of the way. Secondly, Bernie Sanders is bound by certain rules to play the game according to those rules. I am not. Okay. So, in other words, the way you should see it is he serves me, I don't serve him, right? So, he is more restricted in what he can and cannot do. I mean, if you think about the true uh, meaning of the political process, how it's supposed to work ideally, is that the politician actually serves the electorate. It serves the people who uh, elect them into office, right? And so think about it. The politician actually is more limited in what they can and cannot do than the people because they're supposed to represent the people. So they're constantly have to think, they're supposed to wake up in the morning and say to themselves, what do the people want me to do? Whereas the people can say whatever they want. Okay, so again, so he is restricted by the rules of the Democratic Party and by his mandate to represent us, whereas I have more range. But let me go more specifically here. What do I mean by restricted by the rules? So he ran on the Democratic ticket, and so as a gentleman, if you're running on a Democratic ticket, you have to support whoever the Democratic Party eventually nominates. That's just the way the rules of the game are. And he's playing by those rules, and I respect him for that. It doesn't mean that I'm bound by that. Like I said, I'm not bound by that, but he is still going by those rules, and so just let's just keep that in mind. Okay, he's supposed to say whatever he's saying. It doesn't mean that you have to listen. Thirdly, I think that Bernie Sanders is relatively old, and for all his interest and passion and care for the middle class and the political revolution that he unleashed and which still continues and so on, I think that he lacks a certain imagination as to what the political process could look like if we fix it, okay, in a certain way. And specifically, I'm talking about the two-party system. I'm talking about the two-party system. So we have had, almost from the inception of this country, we've had a two-party system. And the way Bernie Sanders is thinking is as follows. This is how he was thinking going into the election. He's saying to himself, okay, there's a lot of systemic problems here, and we need to fix this. We need to eliminate money in politics. We need to break up the banks. They need to get rid of free trade, and so on and so forth. Which party most closely resembles this package? Okay, which one is closer to me? And the answer to him was, of course, it's going to be the Democratic Party. Okay, so he's saying to himself, this country is a two-party system. So if I just say they're not close enough to me and I'm going to open up a third party, I'm not going to have any power. Right? So he's saying to himself, the only way that I can achieve anything realistically is by trying to persuade that power that is already closer to me on positions, try to persuade them to reform itself and accept my reform package. Right? And so that's what he went along and did. Right? He ran on the Democratic Party, even though he wasn't a Democrat himself. Right? But he ran on the Democratic Party, reasoning that this is the only realistic way to achieve change in America. You have to be you have to convince one of the two parties to take up your battle cry and fight for you. And historically, by the way, that would be a sound reasoning, because if you look at the abolition movement, if you look at the women's franchise movement, and so on, these things were accomplished by a major party taking up the interest of a fringe, of a special interest. And the special interest, in fact, dissolved after the major party took up their cause. And so this is the way reform happens, Sanders is saying to himself. And so that's why he ran on the Democratic ticket. Accordingly, now this is very important here. Let me get to the crux of my argument. Accordingly, what Sanders is saying is, okay, so I lost. I wanted to win the nomination, and it certainly would have accelerated that process of getting the major party, the Democratic Party, to accept my progressive ideas. But I lost. Okay, so let's see. Let's do some inventory here. Okay, I didn't win the nomination for presidency, but my ideas still stand. You can't kill an idea, right? So I still negotiated very hard to have those ideas incorporated in the Democratic platform. Okay, during the platform debates and discussions, which already took place, by the way. I can still endorse people down the ticket. Okay, I can endorse senators, congressmen, and in local politics. I can endorse people who are sympathetic to the progressive cause. There's still so many ways that I can be influential that do not involve me being the president, right? And he's right. He's 100% right on this. And so he's saying to himself, okay, so we don't have to give up the fight. It means nothing. It's just a hiccup. It's not a big deal that I'm not the nominee for president. I can still go with Clinton, and most of what we want will still be done, or at least we'll still be on track to get that done eventually. And so going back to what I said earlier, there's only two major parties. Which one is the better one? Oh, it's got to be Clinton. It's got to be the Democrats. And so I'll go with that one while still pursuing all these reforms within the party in other ways than being the president. Okay, so that's what he's reasoning. But here's why I do not agree with him, and I will not support Clinton. So one of the things that I mentioned, I already mentioned earlier, which is that, again, he is supposed to endorse her because he ran on the Democratic ticket. I don't. But here I want to add a very important additional reason for me not supporting Clinton. And that is that the very basis of his reasoning, which is that the Democratic Party more closely represents the interests of his constituency, the Bernie Sanders constituency, such as myself, is just fundamentally flawed. I don't think that's true. Okay, and this is where his age and his his, I don't use the word obsession, but his the fact that he's so accustomed to thinking in traditional terms and conventional terms is where I think he is making a mistake. Because yes, it is true that in the past, this would have been. Can you stop this? Oh my God. Okay, it is true that in the past this would have been the case, but I think in the coming election, it's just not the case. Why not? Because we need to shake things up. The status quo is just so fundamentally unacceptable that even such a crazy presidency as a Trump presidency is